When a man calling himself Heckenschütze, or sniper in German, wrote a letter to the US Embassy in Bern in April 1958, the West had no idea of the scale and magnitude of the revelations that would soon follow. The mysterious writer insisted that he would deal only with director of the FBI J Edgar Hoover. From the outset, the relationship between spy and spy master was built on a lie. The CIA took over the running of the operation, all the while masquerading as the Bureau. The agency soon realized that their informant was not just another spy. They deduced that he was a senior member of Polish intelligence with access to an unprecedented level of top-secret Soviet information. As time went on, Agent Sniper became arguably the most valuable asset the West had during the early to mid-phase of the Cold War. Agent Sniper exposed 1,693 communist spies, agents, and informants operating covertly within the apparatus of Western intelligence. Behind the mask of Agent Sniper was Colonel Mikhail Gorlianevsky. He was a complex figure and an expert at compartmentalizing his multiple identities. His story is, however, not just one of daring espionage. It's also a tale of deception, paranoia, and a bizarre descent into delusion. The country he risked everything to help exploited his flaws, the CIA driving him so far down the rabbit hole that he ultimately lost his mind. This is the tale of Mikhail Gorlianevsky, the spy who was left out in the cold. Mikhail Gorlianevsky was born on the 16th of August 1922 in Poland, in a city close to the border with the Soviet Union. His early years were shaped by the turbulence of interwar Europe, a time when Poland was struggling to solidify its independence after over a century of partition and foreign domination. His father, also Mikhail, was an accountant and tax official, and his mother, Janina, a housewife. Gorlianevsky's family was modest but patriotic, instilling in him a sense of national pride and a fascination with military affairs. During the interwar years, the family moved to Wolsztyn. This was located 800 kilometers to the west and near the border with Germany. There, Mikhail Sr. worked for a brewery while Janina managed the home and cared for their son. After completing his schooling, Mikhail Gorlianevsky spent 3 years studying for a law degree at the University of Poznan. The outbreak of war would send young Mikhail on a totally different path. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, followed weeks later by the Soviet Union from the east, his homeland was torn apart. Like many Poles, Gorlianevsky witnessed firsthand the horrors of occupation and war. These formative experiences fostered in him both a hatred for totalitarian regimes and an acute understanding of survival under oppressive conditions. He was employed under German administration, working as an accountant like his father. After the war, Poland fell under Soviet domination, becoming a satellite state of the USSR. Gorlianevsky adapted to this new reality with apparent ease, applying for membership in the Polish Works Party and making a modest start in Polish intelligence in 1945 by working as a sentry. His career progressed quickly from there, being awarded one of Poland's prestigious honors, the Bronze Cross of Merit, in 1946. By 1948, Gorlianevsky was working as a clerk for Poland's secret police force known as the UB. This organization operated under the umbrella of Poland's Ministry of Public Security, or MBP. The UB, as the secret police, was in particular notorious for its role in suppressing dissent and rooting out enemies of the communist regime. Gorlianevsky quickly distinguished himself as an intelligent and resourceful officer, earning promotions that brought him closer to the inner workings of Poland's intelligence apparatus. During the 1950s, he continued to climb the ranks of the MBP. On the 1st of June 1953, by which time he had already achieved the rank of Major, he was appointed as head of Department 9 of the Counterintelligence Branch. Charged with overseeing espionage operations abroad, his work required him to liaise closely with Soviet intelligence agencies like the KGB and the GRU. In fact, after being assigned to Warsaw, he became the KGB's point man for keeping tabs on his UB colleagues. Poland, being a satellite state and not part of the Soviet Union proper, was never fully trusted by its communist overlords. The KGB wanted to keep an eye on the UB to make sure its members were towing the party line. Thus, Mikhail Golyanevsky wielded power and had access to top-level secrets not only in his own country, but of the Soviet Union as well. While he remained outwardly loyal to the communist cause, Golyanevsky's experiences over the course of his career began to sow seeds of doubt about the system he served. His work required him to travel not only across Poland, East Germany, and into the Soviet Union, but also into the West. It was there that he witnessed the stark contrast between Eastern Bloc communism and Western democracy. Back home in Poland, he observed firsthand how Soviet dominance stifled Polish sovereignty and how ideological purges destroyed lives without mercy. Despite these misgivings, Golyanevsky's career continued on its upward trajectory. By 1955, he had achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel and had become deputy chief of military counterintelligence for Poland. He was then privy to some of the most sensitive secrets in the Eastern Bloc. Golyanevsky's naked ambition and general arrogance sometimes made him unpopular among his colleagues, but he was regarded by his bosses at the UB and KGB alike as a competent and efficient agent. His was a role that demanded absolute loyalty, but beneath his outward facade of compliance, Golyanevsky harbored a dangerous secret. He no longer believed in the system he had pledged to defend. With his career still on the rise, Golyanevsky's personal life was causing a lot more strife. He was married to a woman named Anna. She had a daughter from a previous marriage, and she and Mikhail had 3 children together. By 1954, their marriage was disintegrating, with Anna accusing her husband of poisoning her and viewing him as enemy number 1. While his home life was in a state of disarray, Mikhail had fallen in love with and taken as his mistress Irmgard Kampf, a 28-year-old German woman living in East Germany working as a secretary. He met Irmgard in 1958 during one of his missions. Golyanevsky concealed his true identity from her, telling Irmgard that he was a Jewish journalist named Jan Roman. He told her that he had been a resistance fighter during the war and that his family was murdered by the Nazis. For 2 years, he showered her with gifts paid for by using UB funds that he had pilfered. Kampf used this money to buy luxury goods for herself, jewelry from Switzerland, a fur coat from Paris, and fashionable clothes from England. Not only this, but her family apartment managed to acquire a much sought-after Western-made television set. By the time that all was said and done, Golyanevsky had defrauded his department of the equivalent of $60,000 from its operational fund. He withdrew money ostensibly for the operations he was running and the agents with whom he was meeting. In truth, he was using the money on his mistress, not realizing that his acts of affection and his rampant embezzlement would soon enough attract the attention of his superiors. As their relationship developed, Golyanevsky revealed to Kampf that the name she knew him by was only a pseudonym he used while working in the underground against German fascists. He then told her that his real name was Roman Tarnowski, which of course was also not true, but was in fact his main cover name that he used for UB operations. Golyanevsky had also promised to marry Kampf, of course not telling her that he was in fact already married with 3 children. Golyanevsky also had a mistress in Poland, although that other woman played little role in the drama that was to follow. It was clear that it was Irmgard Kampf who held Golyanevsky's heart. By April of 1958, and as his marital life disintegrated and he tried to balance his time between multiple secret girlfriends, Mikhail Golyanevsky is said by author Tim Tate to have finally crossed the ideological Rubicon. His position as Deputy Chief of Military Counterintelligence for Poland had provided him with an insider's view of the Soviet-dominated intelligence apparatus, and what he saw deeply troubled him. The oppressive nature of the regime, coupled with his own growing disillusionment with communism, led Golyanevsky to decide that it was time for him to act. On the 1st of April 1958, the United States Embassy in Bern, Switzerland, received a mysterious envelope addressed to Ambassador Henry J. Taylor. Inside the envelope was another containing a letter written in German and which was addressed to FBI Director J Edgar Hoover. In it, the mysterious correspondent offered information on Soviet and East Bloc espionage agents and operations. The author, identifying himself as Heckenschütze, meaning sniper in German, made it quite clear that he did not trust the CIA, knowing the extent to which it had been penetrated by Soviet bloc agents. He stipulated that the CIA should be totally excluded from any relationship between the source and the FBI. Golianevsky's choice of Bern as the initial point of contact was strategic. Despite American intelligence viewing the Swiss capital as an unpromising backwater in the Cold War with Moscow, Golianevsky knew that Moscow had infiltrated spies into all US government departments except the FBI. The letter had been mailed from Prague. It contained no fingerprints, suggesting that the author had worn gloves, and the papers bore no identifying marks which might have helped analysts work out who had prepared it. The immediate reaction in the West was cautious and skeptical. Ambassador Taylor, inexperienced in intelligence matters, stuck to protocol but in direct breach of the terms of engagement set out in the letter, forwarded the letter to the CIA station chief in Bern. Tenant Pete Bagley was initially unimpressed by the letter. Also following protocol, he sent the letter on to the CIA's prime operating station in Berlin. There it was filed away by Ted Shackley on the basis that it was written in an impenetrable form of double talk. Bagley also, however, sent a copy of the message back to CIA headquarters in Washington, D.C. There, the sniper letter landed on the desk of Howard E. Roman, a gifted linguist and former chief of the agency's Polish unit. Contrary to the assessment by others, Roman's view was more positive. Forensic analysis of the letter's content and writing style indicated a likelihood that the author was Polish. In his view, the letter's contents warranted further investigation. Roman's positivity was not shared by a man whose paranoia would play havoc with Golianevsky's life in time to come. James Jesus Angleton, the head of the CIA's counterintelligence branch, as always, suspected a Soviet provocation. In other words, a bogus offer designed to mislead Western intelligence and catch them in a trap. When Angleton first examined Sniper's odd and elliptical letters, he concluded that it was most likely a Soviet deception. Nevertheless, Angleton decided to allow the situation to play out initially to see what happened. All the while, the FBI was blissfully unaware of Agent Sniper and his desire to communicate only with its director. This act of deception on the part of the CIA, while securing a valuable intelligence asset, would later have significant repercussions for Golianevsky and nearly cost him his life. To maintain the appearance that the FBI was in charge and that the CIA was not involved, as per the instructions given by the mysterious informant, the agency placed a coded advertisement in the classified section of a German newspaper. Sniper was given details of a CIA-owned post office box in West Berlin, where he could send reports and pick up subsequent requests for additional information. A month later, in early May 1958, Sniper sent his first closely typed report to, who was in his mind, J Edgar Hoover. From that spring and for the next 2 years, Agent Sniper would mail the agency a succession of multi-page, single-spaced letters at near-monthly intervals. Each letter provided extensive information about Soviet bloc spies in the West and Soviet intelligence operations. To say that the reports provided by Heckenschütze were a bombshell was an understatement. They were nuclear. Agent Sniper outlined just how thoroughly compromised Western intelligence agencies had become. The shocking revelations threatened to wash away the carefully constructed edifice of Soviet espionage in the West. Golianevsky provided names and details of a stunning 1,693 intelligence personalities, including officers, co-opted workers, and agents. But who were the spies at which Agent Sniper had taken aim? Among the hundreds of names were included many of whom would live on in Cold War infamy for decades to come. One of the most significant blows Golianevsky delivered early on was a tip-off about spies on the KGB payroll operating in the United Kingdom. One of these spies, the letter said, worked for the British Navy. the other, more startlingly, for MI6. This information was relayed by the CIA to MI5 and MI6 in the United Kingdom, who codenamed the unknown spies as Lambda 1 and Lambda 2. As the US and UK spy agencies scrambled to investigate the moles within their ranks, looming over the new sniper intelligence was the ever-present shadow of James Angleton. Over the years leading the agency, what started as a healthy skepticism developed into an all-out paranoia. Angleton nursed a profound belief that the KGB had successfully infiltrated the CIA at the highest levels, a conviction that fueled his relentless mole hunts and fostered a climate of suspicion that paralyzed the agency for years. This inherent distrust extended to defectors and informants, whom Angleton viewed as potential plants, sent by the Soviets to sow discord and disinformation. The more valuable the information, Angleton reasoned, the more likely it was to be a deception. Regardless, Sniper's warnings could not be ignored. His revelations prompted investigations and reshuffling within Western intelligence agencies. This included Operation B Vision, initiated by the CIA to investigate Moscow's infiltration of West German intelligence. It wasn't only individual spies that Golyanevsky compromised. He also provided valuable insights into Soviet bloc intelligence operations, including their methods of recruitment, communication, and tradecraft. This information allowed Western intelligence agencies to refine their counterintelligence strategies and better defend against Soviet espionage efforts. Golyanevsky was also the first source to report in detail on the concept of disinformation, in today's parlance, fake news. He explained how the KGB used false information to protect Soviet agents, discredit accurate information, and mislead Western security services. As much as the CIA were loath to admit it, they were legally bound to share the agent sniper intel with the FBI. The CIA is prohibited from operating within the United States. All things related to domestic security and counter-espionage within the US fall squarely within the jurisdiction of the FBI. Given that so many of the exposed spies were diplomatic staff who rotated in and out of Washington, D.C., the CIA had no alternative but to let the FBI know of their informant. By December 1958, the sniper reports had started to accumulate, and the CIA finally broke the news to the FBI. Understandably, when Hoover was informed, he was furious. Howard Roman, the CIA forensic linguist, said that Hoover was mad as hell when he found out that we had been opening his mail. After the red mist had subsided, Hoover agreed to allow the CIA to continue running the sniper operation, provided the FBI was shown all his intelligence. By February 1959, the Bureau was satisfied that Agent Sniper was a reliable source. It was only James Angleton who still harbored his doubts. Since the reports also implicated US diplomatic staff, the FBI in turn was obliged to notify the State Department. The very thing that Golyanevsky feared was coming to pass. The information he was passing on was being circulated far and wide, with little regard for his safety. The CIA instructed all those who received the intelligence not to act on it without the agency's express authorization, but this was about as effective as closing the stable door after the horse had bolted. But it didn't stop there. The State Department went on to tell the US Embassy in Warsaw that an informant was exposing the KGB's control of US Embassy staff in Poland. It was tragically ironic that Sniper had already warned that the US Embassy in Warsaw was compromised. It was only a matter of time before word filtered back to the UB and KGB that Polish intelligence was leaking information to the West. By late 1960, Golyanevsky learned from a contact in Warsaw that the KGB was looking for a pig in the UB's foreign intelligence component who was leaking secrets to the CIA. His heart sank. He couldn't say for sure, but the odds were good that the so-called pig was none other than himself. And this is where things came full circle. The KGB didn't trust the UB in Poland, but there was a Polish man they did trust. His name just so happened to be Mikhail Golyanevsky. In an ironic twist of fate, Golyanevsky was appointed to lead the investigation into, well, himself. Around this same time, towards the end of 1960, Golyanevsky found his personal relationships start to catch up with him. The amount of money that he had withdrawn from operational funds had not gone unnoticed. The Stasi in East Germany had been investigating following an audit, and in November 1960 reported to the Polish authorities that Golyanevsky was having unauthorized contacts with his mistress Irmgard Kampf. Just before Christmas in 1960, Golyanevsky was promptly ordered by his bosses to explain his secret love life. Golyanevsky admitted to falling in love with Kampf, explaining that his wife Anna was mentally unwell and was acting unreasonably towards him. He said that he intended to divorce her and that his heart was set on marrying Kampf. Given his senior position within Polish intelligence, obtaining a divorce was not as simple as instructing a lawyer and serving divorce papers. He needed bureaucratic sanction from his superiors. This they were not prepared to give, and Golyanevsky was ordered to end his relationship with Kampf. Not only was Golyanevsky's heart broken, but his once promising career was in tatters. He was demoted and removed from his senior post. With the vultures circling overhead in the investigation into the leak in his office, Golyanevsky had to come up with a plan, and quick. He conceded to the UB that he had no choice but to break off his relationship with Kampf, but he proposed to his bosses as a concession that he be allowed to return to East Germany to end the relationship in person. The UB ultimately agreed, but only on the condition that Golyanevsky take the opportunity while in East Germany to tie up loose ends with his local agents and informants. With this, the UB inadvertently left the door open for Golyanevsky to execute his daring plan. Golyanevsky rushed back to his Warsaw office. Grabbing his miniature Minox camera provided to him by the CIA some months earlier, he photographed all the remaining documents in his possession. He then removed documents from his office, some being destined for a CIA dead drop in a Warsaw park, the others being stashed in envelopes to be sent by courier to Berlin in anticipation of his arrival there. He then withdrew 11,300 Deutschmarks from office funds and sent a telegram ahead to Irmgard Kampf to advise her that he would shortly arrive in East Berlin. On the 26th of December 1960, Golyanevsky left Warsaw by train. Arriving in East Berlin, he met with his colleagues from the MSW, the umbrella department for all Polish espionage services. He requested additional funding for his trip, which was granted. At this point, it is not quite clear what Irmgard Kampf thought of all that was going on, but she certainly had no idea she was getting caught up in a plan to defect. She still knew her betrothed by his false alias Roman Tarnowski. A few days after arriving in Berlin, Golyanevsky decided the time was right to make his move. On a cold January evening in 1961, Golyanevsky and Kampf slipped away from their Stasi surveillance in East Berlin, walking towards the border with West Berlin and the promise of freedom. The stakes were impossibly high. One wrong step, one moment of hesitation, and they would be captured. But Golyanevsky pressed on, driven by the desperate hope of escaping the clutches of the UB and finding sanctuary in the West. His plan worked, and the pair made it across the border without incident. The Berlin Wall had not yet been constructed, and so crossing from east to west was not as difficult as it would later prove to be for so many others. Golyanevsky immediately contacted his CIA handler using a pre-arranged code name, Herr Kowalski. He then caught a taxi to the US consulate. There he revealed himself as Heckenschütze, the man who had been handing over top-secret Soviet intelligence for the past 3 years. The CIA's Berlin station immediately sent an urgent message to Washington advising of the defector's arrival. The CIA was surprised by the presence of Kampf. They had no idea who she was or why she was there. Golyanevsky, not yet having revealed his true identity, said that he and Kampf were seeking political asylum. He asked, however, for Kampf to leave the room. As his fiancée stood outside in the corridor, Golyanevsky revealed his true identity as a colonel in the UB. He told agents that he was concerned that the shock of Irmgard discovering his true identity and plans to defect could negatively affect her mental health. Not only did Irmgard not know his true name or who he worked for, but was also in the dark to the fact that Golyanevsky was married with 3 children. The agency agreed to go along with Golyanevsky's lie to Kampf, transporting the couple by a military plane on the 5th of January 1961 to Wiesbaden, west of Frankfurt, where they were housed in a CIA defector reception center. It was there that truths finally started to emerge. Golyanevsky revealed to Kampf his true identity, and the CIA finally had to reveal that they had been deceiving Golyanevsky all these years. Golyanevsky was understandably not at all happy about this, then realizing how it was he came to be compromised. Meanwhile, back at UB headquarters, Polish intelligence had realized that something was amiss. Golyanevsky had missed a scheduled meeting with one of his East German agents, and his whereabouts were unknown. When he couldn't be found at the Berlin apartment rented for him, or anywhere for that matter, the Soviets realized the worst had happened. An urgent investigation was launched to discover what information Golyanevsky had compromised. Breaking into the safe in his office, the UB discovered that he had clandestinely amassed a vast range of documents detailing some of the intelligence service's most sensitive information. While the UB and the KGB scrambled to assess their losses, Golyanevsky and Kampf were flown by a military aircraft on the 12th of January 1961 to America. There, Golyanevsky underwent extensive interrogation by the CIA, first at a Maryland safe house and later in Virginia. The couple were given the cover identities of Franz Oldenburg and Irmgard Henschel. It was at this point that the mind games began, and Golyanevsky would slowly descend into madness. Golyanevsky's debriefing was a goldmine for the CIA, leading to the eventual rounding up of countless spies. From the USA to Europe and the Middle East, Golyanevsky provided details of what appeared to be a wholesale penetration of Western intelligence. So who were some of the spies that Agent Sniper took out? Beneath the mask of Lambda 1 was George Blake, a high-ranking officer within MI6. Blake had emerged a communist after being freed as a prisoner during the Korean War. He then soon turned double agent for the Soviet Union. He betrayed Western operations to the KGB, most infamously the secretive Berlin Tunnel and Operation Gold, a joint MI6 and CIA operation to spy on the Soviet embassy in East Berlin. His treachery resulted in the deaths of numerous Western agents. Golyanevsky's information was instrumental in exposing Blake's duplicity, leading to his arrest and imprisonment. Blake's time behind bars was, however, short-lived. He managed to escape Wormwood Scrubs and defect to the Soviet Union, where he lived out the rest of his days. Lambda 2 proved to be Harry Houghton of the infamous Portland spy ring. This network, operating in Britain, had been systematically funneling sensitive military secrets to Moscow. Houghton was a former Royal Navy clerk who had access to classified documents at the underwater detection establishment in Portland through his girlfriend Ethel G. Together, they passed on Navy secrets to Gordon Lonsdale, who was actually Conan Molody, a skilled Soviet intelligence officer. The ring also included Peter and Helen Kroger, whose real names were Morris and Lorna Cohen, who were American-born spies who provided crucial communication channels to Moscow. Golyanevsky's information allowed British intelligence to dismantle the entire network. Golyanevsky's revelations extended to other critical arenas of the Cold War. In Sweden, he exposed Stig Wennerstrom, a senior Air Force officer and NATO official, as a long-term Soviet asset. Wennerstrom had been providing Moscow with classified information about Swedish and NATO defense strategies, significantly compromising Western security in the strategically important Nordic region. The impact of Golyanevsky's defection rippled even to the Middle East, where he identified Israel Beer, a prominent Israeli security expert and confidant of Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, as a Soviet agent. Beer had been providing Moscow with valuable insights into Israeli defense policies and military capabilities. In West Germany, Golyanevsky's information led to the exposure of Heinz Felfer, the deputy head of the West German Foreign Intelligence Service, the BND. Felfer had been a Soviet agent since the early 1950s, providing Moscow with critical information about West German intelligence operations and Western strategies. In the USA, Golyanevsky helped to expose Irvin Skarbek, a U.S. State Department official who was working in the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw during the late 1950s. Skarbek became the victim of a classic honey trap, the UB catching him in bed with a Polish woman they had sent in to entrap him. He was blackmailed into cooperating with the UB and the KGB. Skarbek was low-ranking, and the information he provided was of a lower classification than many of the other figures already mentioned. This led to speculation that Skarbek was set up as a distraction to protect a more valuable long-term KGB agent within the US Embassy in Warsaw. Skarbek, or perhaps whoever he was sacrificed to protect, is the likely candidate for the person who leaked Agent Sniper's activity to the Soviets. One might think that the CIA would have been bending over backwards to accommodate their new defector, to put his mind at ease and to do all in their power to make him feel welcomed in his new home, the United States. After all, Golyanevsky had risked his life every single day for the last 3 years and had asked for nothing in return but safe haven. But it was not to be so. The CIA constantly switched between using his real name and his two alternate identities. This destabilized Golyanevsky's already precarious psychological and mental health. Some say this was done intentionally by the CIA in an attempt to reclaim psychological superiority over their agent. Whatever the reason may have been, the mind games were laying the foundation for a future identity crisis. Not only was the CIA taking a toll on Golyanevsky's psyche, but he also had to worry about those back in Poland and the Soviet Union that were actively hunting him down. In April 1961, a military court in Warsaw tried Golyanevsky in absentia and sentenced him to death. In the wake of the trial, the UB launched Operation Teletechnik, with multiple agents being tasked with tracking Golyanevsky down and executing his sentence. The Soviets and their satellites had a history of sending assassins to carry out court-sanctioned death sentences, and Golyanevsky was acutely aware of this. The mishandling by the CIA of possibly their most valuable agent was driven also in part by James Angleton, Golyanevsky's perennial skeptic. As 1963 dawned, Angleton's distrust of Golyanevsky had reached fever pitch. Angleton was eating out of the hand of another Soviet defector, Anatoly Golitsyn. A KGB officer from the Soviet Union's embassy in Helsinki, Golitsyn defected to the West around the same time as Golyanevsky at the end of 1961. From the outset, he was recognized as an embellisher of fact, claiming to have been briefed personally by Stalin in 1952 and that he had access to high-grade intelligence. As it turned out, he had little in the way of any valuable information to share. What he did disclose was either entirely made up or information he learned from other sources like Golyanevsky and simply repeated. He told James Angleton of the so-called monster plot, which was a supposed Soviet plan to paralyze Western intelligence by sending false defectors to spread misinformation. Golitsyn said that Golyanevsky was a Soviet provocation, a dangle designed to mislead. Golitsyn said that he himself, conveniently, was the only true defector acting in Western interests. For reasons unknown, Angleton lapped this all up, allowing an exception to his usual paranoid skepticism in the case of Golitsyn. Angleton had, sadly, bet on the wrong horse. Golitsyn was at best an egocentric individual and a fraud. At worst, and what is possible, is that he was in fact acting on behalf of the KGB the entire time. By mid to late 1963, the Golyanevsky operation was falling apart as James Angleton ate from the palm of his new favorite defector, Golitsyn. The initial euphoria of Golyanevsky's defection had soon given way to a darker reality. As time wore on, Golyanevsky sensed a shift in the CIA's attitude towards him. His application for US citizenship was stalled, he was kept in an increasingly isolated environment, and the progress of investigations into his leads slowed. His requests to meet with CIA Director John McCone were denied, and the CIA reneged on their agreement to pay and protect him. All this would lead to a mental health crisis and a bizarre claim by Golyanevsky that would seal his fate in the eyes of the CIA. Soon after defecting, Golyanevsky had started passing remarks and hinting at the facts that he was descended from royalty. More specifically, he started to say that he was a Romanov, the Imperial Russian family that was deposed by the Bolsheviks in the 1917 Russian Revolution. During the bloodletting, Tsar Nicholas II, along with 17 of his family members, were executed in a single day. Many other relatives of the Romanov dynasty would also lose their lives. Ever since, dozens of pretenders had emerged, claiming to be the heir to the Imperial Russian throne and the considerable Romanov fortune that had been stashed away in the West by Tsar Nicholas II. With his relationship with his CIA handlers in tatters and feeling aggrieved and betrayed, Kolyonevsky went all in on this claim. He declared himself to be Alexei Romanov, the surviving son of the last Tsar of Russia and heir to the throne. He used this name when applying for US citizenship and when he married Irmgard in the United States. His claim carried weight with some, with his marriage to Irmgard being facilitated by the most senior bishop in the US Russian Orthodox Church. Initially, the claims were made only to his handlers, but by the end of 1963, the US government had effectively abandoned Mikhail Kolyonevsky. In a desperate move, Kolyonevsky made a radio appearance on the 10th of August 1964 in New York, during which he publicly proclaimed himself to be Alexei, the son of the last Tsar of Russia. He said that he had come to America not only to expose Soviet spies, but also to lay claim to his fortune as the legitimate heir to the Russian throne. His story was that he had avoided assassination during the revolution by being smuggled through Siberia to Poland. The hype around Tsarevich claims in the US was at an all-time high, and the media lapped up the sensational story. On the 12th of September 1964, Guy Richards announced Kolyonevsky's claim in the New York Journal American. It seemed that, by this stage, Kolyonevsky had absolutely convinced himself that he was in fact Alexei Romanov. When he and Irmgard Kampf had a daughter, they named her Tatiana Romanov. It seems that perhaps a combination of greed and madness was Kolyonevsky's motivation for making the claim to be the Tsarevich. Kolyonevsky was a man accustomed to living multiple lives. From his personal to his professional life, he had dozens of compartments into which he shoehorned his various identities. Perhaps a combination of his own unstable mental health and being pushed by the mistreatment of the CIA led him to make his most wild claim to be the heir to the Russian throne. It wasn't long before the sensation faded and Kolyonevsky's claim was discredited. After a blaze of media coverage in the mid-1960s, Kolyonevsky faded back into near total obscurity. There were some people who would not so easily forget the eccentric Polish defector. The UB was still in the midst of its 10-year operation to find and neutralize Kolyonevsky. An elaborate surveillance operation was conducted on Kolyonevsky where he lived in the Silver Towers, a Queens apartment block in New York City. By 1968, the UB had managed to map out his apartment and its surrounds, which was sent back to Warsaw. While Kolyonevsky was not precisely aware of these details, he no doubt assumed that he was being watched and that there was a good chance he might meet an untimely end at the hands of a UB or KGB assassin. This too must have contributed towards his unstable mental health. From that point, his life devolved into a complex web of legal battles, conspiracy theories, and marginalization. For many years, Kolyonevsky focused his efforts on vindicating himself and challenging the narrative surrounding his defection. He hired a lawyer in December of 1965 and made efforts to compel US Congress to investigate his mistreatment at the hands of the CIA. He wrote numerous letters to government officials detailing his grievances against the CIA. From 1974, he started to publish a monthly bulletin called Double Eagle, which was an outlet for his outlandish claims and the spouting of conspiracy theories. Kolyonevsky died in July 1993 in Lenox Hill Hospital, New York, after a short illness. His death received minimal attention, with only a small paid obituary notice in the New York Times. Kolyonevsky's daughter, Tatiana Romanov, has since changed her name and lives in New York. She has never spoken about her father, declining to speak to author Tim Tate. The life of Mikhail Kolyonevsky is a poignant example of the human cost of the Cold War. A brilliant and courageous spy, he was driven by ideological conviction to serve the West and Western democracy. Yet his life story was undermined by his own personal flaws and the very organizations he sought to help. The impact of Golianevsky's intelligence would forever alter the landscape of the Cold War. There can be no denying that what he revealed to the West marks him as one of the most valuable defectors to ever come in from the cold.